Okay, don't run off just yet. I know that this image looks really bad right now. I mean, it is flat, it is unsaturated, it's a log profile. Now, what is a log profile? Should you use it? And if you do, how do you make it look better? Now, I know this looks pretty bad, so let's go ahead and add a color grade onto this, and then I'll explain how we did that. So let's talk about log profiles. Now, it is obvious that log profiles do not look good straight out of your camera. So why would you not just shoot in a standard profile that looks pretty good, has good contrast, good saturation? Why would you not just use that? The log in log profile stands for logarithmic. And I won't get too technical, but that has to do with the way the light data from your image is stored in your video file. If you were to look at a graph for a standard image profile, it would pretty much be a straight line angling up from 0 being black to 100 being white. But in a log profile, they apply a curve to this, and that's so more data is stored in the mid-range of your bit rate, which means that there's more information in the shadows and in the dark areas of your image, rather than all of the data for your bit depth being taken up by the higher highlights and whites of your image. So what that basically means is in a log profile, your shadows are boosted and your highlights are crushed and the image looks pretty flat. Now it may look flat, but there's actually more data and more information that you can use in your post process for color grading, adding contrast and saturation, and it gives you a lot more control over your image when you're editing. So when should you use a log profile? If you want a cinematic image that has more dynamic range, more of the shadows that you can see the details, then you'll want to shoot in a log profile. Now, if you're doing something like live streaming, or if you need to get a video out quickly and you don't have time to go through a lot of coloring, then maybe you'll just shoot in a standard profile. So say you've decided to shoot in log and you want to go through the process of coloring your footage, adding contrast. Let's jump into Premiere Pro and I'll show you how I color grade. Now, I actually wanted to cut in here because I'm about to post this video today, and Gerald Undone, another YouTuber that does very technical reviews of camera gear as well as editing, he actually put out a video today about log profiles and some mistakes that people make when editing them. And he actually talks about some of the things that I'm going to talk about and says that contrast and saturation are not enough when it comes to editing log profiles. And what he's specifically referring to is if you're wanting to compare two different cameras and their color science, and you record in a log profile on each different camera, and then you go in and just add contrast and saturation, and then compare the two and try to say one is better than the other, that's not a very accurate representation of what the camera is recording. And he's correct in saying that just contrast and saturation won't be enough. And what I'm talking about in this tutorial is just how to get started working with log footage, how to get it back to something that would be usable in a final video. And so we start by adding contrast and saturation, and then we take it a step further and adjust some other things. And so I didn't want that to be confusing if you've watched his video or if you're going to watch his video afterwards. We're not necessarily saying different things. He's going about it from a very technical standpoint of if you want to do perfect correction of the log footage and you're looking at the scopes, you would do more to the footage. You would add contrast in different ways by using maybe the curves adjustment. So we're going to start by just using some of the contrast sliders and the highlights and shadows, but this is not a scientific way or a technical way to grade log footage. This is mostly some beginner steps, and it'll take your log footage from looking flat and unsaturated to something that you can use as your final video product. Also a disclaimer, I know that my autofocus was having some issues the other day. I think I may have had a setting wrong, so some parts of the video look a little soft. I'm sorry about that, but I hope that you still find value in this video and you can take some of these things and start working with log footage. So now let's jump into Premiere. Okay, so we're in Premiere Pro, we've got our clip loaded up here, and I'm gonna show you the first step when it comes to working with log footage. That's called correction. What we're gonna do is try to make this footage look a little bit more lifelike, look a little bit more like it would have in person. So we're gonna add contrast in, add saturation. do any white balance adjustment or any colors that don't quite look right out of the gate. We're gonna fix those and make it look just a nice plain image. So the first thing I'm gonna do is start by adding in some contrast. You can see here that's making the darker parts of the image and the shadows be a little bit deeper, and it's bringing the highlights back up. That's probably a little bit much, so I'm gonna back it back down a little bit. Another thing I see here is maybe the highlights are a little bit too hot now, so I'm gonna bring our highlights down, and it's starting to look a little bit more lifelike. There doesn't look like there's any parts of my face that are blown out. I'm also gonna add back in some saturation here. And I don't have to do too much because I know I'm gonna do more coloring later on. Right now the image looks a little green to me, so I'm gonna actually bring our magenta up just a touch. This is a pretty drastic correctional tool, so I don't have to do a whole lot. I'm also gonna deepen the shadows here a little bit, so I'll bring that shadow slider down, and it gives it a little bit more mood. So to me, the skin tones still just look a little bit off in this image, so I'm gonna adjust just the skin tones. You do that by coming down to the curve section here in your Lumetri panel, and in the hue versus hue section, you can make some marks in the yellow, and let's go over here in the reds, and then right here in the middle in the orange section, that's gonna be your skin tones. So I'm gonna make a mark there. And now, as I click this, you can adjust anything in that range of color to a different hue. So if we were to go really drastic, we could make me look blue, or like the Hulk, be more green. But let's start here, and I think it was just a little bit on the green and yellow side. So I'm gonna bump it up just a touch into the oranges and maybe just slightly pink. Again, it does not have to be a huge adjustment. We're just wanting to get the skin tone to look very, very close to how it did in real life. I'm pretty happy with this for a starting point, and I think the correction phase is done. So I'm gonna move on to step 2, which is color grading. So instead of making more adjustments right off the gate, I'm gonna go up here and where it says Lumetri color right here, click this drop down and add Lumetri color effect. This is going to add another layer of color correction. You can see here, you've still got your first layer where you made your correctional adjustments. And in this second one, I'm gonna do a little bit more color adjustment, add a grade to really make it look the way I want to. The reason that I add a second layer of color correction is so that I can toggle on and off and see what adjustments I've made in each step of the way. I'll show you an example of that a little bit later. One way to really fast track your color adjustments is by using LUTs. Now, I'll show you how to use a LUT as well as how to still grade without using a LUT. Let's start with applying a LUT. So go down to your Creative tab, click that, and under your look here, you can select one of the LUTs that Premiere has installed already, or you can select your own if you've purchased one or if you've created it on your own. I purchased a LUT set from Triune Films, and I'll link that below, but I'm not sponsored by them, and this is not me advertising them. I really like this LUT though, and so I'm gonna use it. Now you can tell right away that made some pretty drastic changes to the color. And if you don't want it to be quite as drastic, you can go to your intensity slider here and bring that down. I like somewhere in this 20 to 40 range, so let's go with 30. Here's where you can see just what changes you're making after you've applied the grade. If you come up here to the effects button here, you can toggle on and off the adjustments that you've made. So here's the basic correction, and here's with the LUT. And if you want to see what the LUT would do with no correction, you can go to your first layer of correction and turn that on and off. Still looks pretty bad. So that's why it's important to do correction before you apply a LUT. So let's say you haven't purchased a LUT set, or you want to just really work on dialing in the colors on your own. We're going to go through the same process. Let's go up to our drop-down menu here. We're going to add Lumetri color effect, and in this second one, we're going to do our grade. You would come to your Creative tab, and in your shadows, you can grab this little cursor and start to drag those wherever you want. Let's start by making them a little bit more teal. And our highlights, let's push those up into the oranges. A lot of people like the orange and teal look. And we can toggle this on and off to see what our color grade is actually doing. Now that's a pretty basic way to add some coloring. So say we want to take it a step further and really adjust the colors of the shadows, midtones, highlights, all by themselves. If you come down here to the color wheels and match tab, here you've got those same color wheels, but they're separated out a little bit more: shadows, midtones, and highlights. Let's take our midtones and see what range that's adjusting. So it's a pretty broad stroke of the color in your image. So let's start by zeroing this back out. So say we want to push that into the orange here to make it look a little warmer overall. So at this point, I'm pretty happy with this image. And if there were any other things I wanted to adjust, like say there was an item in the image that was an ugly color or just didn't quite fit in, you could go up and add another Lumetri color effect here and make any of those adjustments in that third layer. So that's the basics of log footage, how to use it, how to work with it in Premiere. I hope you liked this video. If you did and you wouldn't mind, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell notification, and we're gonna do this together. I'll see you in the next one.